music.
What's up, friends? It's Joe here. Excited to be with you guys. All right, so what we have today, we have a cool modern jazz tune. When you say the word jazz, because I work a lot in jazz, there's a lot of different forms, from the standard classic trio thing with an upright bass, a kit, real small, high-pitched toms, and a piano, all the way to a more what I would call fusion or groove-based jazz. And there's a couple different variations in between. But the thing about them is they're all very, very different, and there's very different expectations. But at the root of all of it is the fact that the musicianship is paramount. Those guys take musicianship seriously to the highest levels. They're incredible. Some of the best musicians I've ever heard in my life are on jazz sessions and jazz albums. We have a fine example of that right here. But what we do have is an example of the modern fusion groove-based jazz. So in that, it's important in some modern music productions, we take things like drum samples. We try to make our snare drum a big boosh, you know, it's bigger than life, and every backbeat sounds fairly similar. And that is anti-jazz. So what you try to do for the most part when you get a song like this across your desk, if you don't work in this very often, but you're more used to rock and modern pop and praise and worship and various things like that, you can't treat drums in this genre the way you treat drums in those genres, because they will hate it. But there are a lot of intricacies on the snare drum. And in fact, let's solo up the kit just a little bit. And I'm going to show you what we did. And you'll hear that unmistakable snare drum sound, almost like urban gospel, tuned up real tight. Think of things like Carter Buford. You'll hear that type of sound. You don't add samples to that to make it something else. You let it be that. So you just EQ it if you need to, but that's what it needs to be. Same with the tom-toms. There's no sampling. You just let them be what they are. There's so much kick drum there, you almost don't hear the toms. So the way that guy has that drum kit tuned is the way you leave it. Okay, so that said, there is an exception, and that is if you can't make something work. And I was really struggling, just to be real honest, to make this kick drum work. I cheated with a sample. Okay, you're like, you just said not to, but I'm layering it in with the original to try to make it more what I expect that the drummer and the artist are going to want to hear. So for example, here is the original kick drum as recorded. Too round, too dark. Even after my treatment, I came at it with some Neve love. I came at it with some SSL 9K channel strip 2 love, and then a noise gate. And here's what I had at the end of the day. I still didn't feel like the drummer would hear my mix back and say, yeah, that's what I wanted. So I added some of this guy, but to a lower level. Just enough in there to put just a little bit of a point. The original drum is very, very mid-rangey. There's not a lot of bottom end and not a lot of slap. And the sample that I chose, you'll notice, is slap and bottom end. So if I feather that in there with it, by the time you hear the finished mix, you'll never know there's a sample in there, but the drummer will approve the mix. This was recorded in a small room, but I wanted just a little bit of a room sound. So I have this aux send hitting Ocean Way Studios from UAD, and I'm compressing that just like I would a room mic. And let me show you that before and after the room, okay? So it just places the drums in a real space just a little bit. That's all I was looking for. I didn't want the big rock room, just something to tie it together just a little bit. The bass guitar, I'm used to hearing a definite amount of stereo, some chorusing and some flanging and things a lot of times. So I did do, in addition to a couple of other things, you know, like multi-band compression, a little bit of EQ, it looks like just a little bit, and a little bit of 1176 is the old Dimension D here. And I'm going to play you before and after. Okay, is it just me, or when you hear something like that, is it not begging to have a little bit of stereo movement? Probably from listening to too many records in this genre over the years, it's just ingrained into my head. So let's put a little Dimension D on here and see how it goes. that's going to make the mix more exciting. There's only a couple elements in the mix, so anything we can do to create some excitement, I think, is paramount. And then I did also do a buzz track, which is pretty common. This guitar sounds very different in different sections of these two more full band songs, but that's cool. That's kind of what makes the genre. These pieces that they play kind of progress and evolve as they play them. Some of them were a little darker than others and needed just a little bit of point to make it through the track. So basically a smack here. I think that may be a Pro Tools only plugin, but it's really good if you overcompress stuff to turning it into just a big ball of fuzz. And then following that with the SSL, trimming out all the top and bottom, because all I want is a little bit of this right here. That's all I'm looking for, is a little of that articulation. Once it's placed in the mix, you don't hear as much of that distortion as you think. You mostly just hear a more clearly defined bass part, okay? It's funny how distortion is. There's times where it can be very audible, and there's times where we can use it to our advantage, even if we don't want to hear it, just as a way to make elements that we do want to hear a little more audible. So this was a mono guitar, which is cool. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But I felt like it needed just a little more excitement to blend in with everything that was going on. And at times it was very spiky, so I had a little tape compression on there first, followed by this guy. Let's look and see what he was doing. I'm gonna take it out of bypass, and let's just find a spot where it looks a little transient wrench and see what's going on. You see it's clamping down on just some of the pick attack here and there, making it set back into the mix just a tiny bit where those elements won't pop out quite as much when they happen. And I had the SSL 4KB. I just love the mid-forward thing about SSLs. The 4KB is the very first SSL EQ ever, and it's got just a little bit of a grainy, fuzzy element to it, particularly attractive at times. So let me show you before and after. So the chain of events here is fairly important. Sometimes we EQ into our compression, and that being post EQ kind of reins in some of what we're doing, or even makes the compressor smack in a certain way. But that's not what I was wanting here. You'll see the compression is prior to the EQ. I needed that a little bit of bite to cut through the piano, which is bright at times, but I couldn't have that brightness be flying and floating all over the place. So that's why the MC2000 is hammering down that top end a little bit prior to me adding a little top end, if that makes any sense. So I'm controlling the way he played it. I'm reining it in just a little bit, so then I can make it more consistent by placing EQ after compression. And I do it both ways. There's not a right or wrong, but sometimes there's reasons when you compress post EQ or pre EQ. That happens to be just one of the reasons why I went pre EQ. So now let's talk about one other thing. I felt like it could use just a touch of stereo spread. So I have my bass guitar foundation, I have my bass drum foundation, I have my snare drum foundation right in the middle. And so I thought I could put this guy, instead of being right in the middle, put a little size on the electric guitar to make him fit the mix. Let me show you before and after. And let me do it in the mix, because that's where I think you'll hear the biggest impact. See, it's barely got any width to it, but enough that it felt better in the mix to me and to my ears. And I think stereo spread is one of those things most of the time, unless you're looking for a special effect, is best used, in moderate numbers. Okay, one other thing I want to talk about. As we were saying, these songs tend to evolve as the piece progresses. And when they're playing a Nord or something like that, they're flipping through their patches in real time. So when we get this stuff to mix sometimes, even though it's a single track, unlike most other genres of music, that track can change sounds and tones. So just like we would do sometimes on vocals, separate the verse from a chorus because they're in very different places in their vocal range, it's really just to go in and say, okay, this is a different patch and it needs treated differently. Just separate it and drag it to a new track. And that's what I did here. You'll see prior to this point that it is a obvious piano sound. But all of a sudden he switched to kind of a synthy patty thing. Sound more like a Rhodes or something. Electric piano. But he goes back to a piano at one point. So rather than fight that, just separate it to two different tracks and then treat it the way that you want to. Speaking of pianos, let's talk about one other thing. Pianos oftentimes need compression because in some genres they play very aggressive, and the piano is an extremely dynamic instrument. The thing is, our ears don't like the sound of compression on a piano very much. So you have to find ways to make it sound a little more linear but not sound compressed. And there's one tool that's very effective at that for me, the API Style 2500. And right here we have the Plugin Alliance version of it. And you can see these settings. All right, so I'm going to show you before and after. Okay, pretty rangy, right? We want the energy of it, but let's rein it in just a little bit with the Lindell here. So we're reining it in a couple dB, and that's on the VU meter, so we're probably actually getting a little more compression than that if it was a peak meter or something, but it doesn't sound compressed. Check that out. So it fits the mix a little bit better, but the piano player is not going to hear it and reject the mix because it sounds like too compressed. Because piano players generally, unless they're going for a special effect, do not love the sound of compression on a piano. All right, so that's a couple of mix tips and tricks, a little look behind the scenes of what I did for Michael Humphreys and his band of incredible musicians on their song Family Ties. Remember, download the Multitracks and give it a go. Have fun with it and enjoy it. All right, guys, happy mixing.